Thanks, 12 family, for having me. I want us to process a little bit of what type of posture should we have from here. We're aware of, in the last 3 weeks, that there have been many protests, many things, maybe even in ourselves and our families, that have come up with how we have treated historically African-American Black communities around the United States of America. And for this is one of the reasons why church Christian communities are one of the most segregated places in the United States. And so we actually have to think and ask ourselves questions about what should the posture should we have when we go from here? What are the things we should do after 3 to 5 months pass and we're not tweeting, we're not putting stuff on social media, we're starting to have conversations more maybe with our friends, or maybe conversations start to die. So where do we go from here? And what should our posture be? See, if I'm honest, as Christians, this is an important question, and the gospel addresses it. That the gospel allows us to understand the good news, but also it tells us, sort of, here's the posture you should have. And I find it especially perfect at this time in this season. That no longer we can say we don't know, maybe. For some of us, maybe this is the first time we're seeing some of the injustice towards marginalized groups, especially African-American Black communities. And for many of us, maybe this is something that we've known before. And so the gospel actually addresses to say, here's the posture you should have. And so before we start to examine other people, my hope, 12 family, is that we examine ourselves. I'm going to say that again. Before we start examining and trying to focus on other people, my hope and my desire is that we examine ourselves. One of my favorite quotes is from Paulo Freire. The unexamined life is a life not worth living. Once again, the unexamined life is a life not worth living. So, how do we align our posture with the heart of God? How do we align our posture when we talk to our family, friends, and care for other people, that make sure that it's aligned to the way that Jesus Christ loves us? A great scripture in the Bible that I'm going to read through quick is from Micah 6, verses 6 to 8. It says, "What does the Lord require? What shall I come before the Lord and bow myself before him on high? Shall I come with him with burnt offerings, with calves 1 year old? Will the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams, with 10,000s of rivers of oil? Shall I give my firstborn of my trespasses, the fruit of my body for the sins of my soul? But he told you, O man, what is good? And what does the Lord require of you? But to do justice, and to love kindness, and to walk humbly with God." See, here's what's interesting I'm learning. That a lot of people just want to do justice. A lot of people stop and say, you know what, I'm going to do what God says, I'm going to do justice. But we forget that there's 2 other things that he says after justice. And one of the things we have to know about biblical justice is that biblical justice is the quality of being treated fair and reasonable. Fair and reasonable, which means you have to understand where the person's coming from. And what we're starting to see in society, especially, it's sad as I want to say this, around us Christian communities, is that we're seeing people not have biblical justice. That you might be saying the right thing, but your posture is not. And so biblical justice is not just righting the wrong, but caring for the generosity of other people, social issues, and the poor and the vulnerable. And what's so beautiful about this Bible, from the Old Testament to the New, is that you see the heart of God is to always care for the least of these, to care for the poor. And you're probably wondering why. It's because we have seen through society, those are the people who usually we forget about. Those are the people that we can walk through our whole day without even acknowledging or knowing. We are seeing from the Black and brown community, African American community, what happens when you don't feel like justice has been done. And so my hope is that we understand God's heart. Because in the Bible, it's almost like sometimes we come to the Bible and we say, let me pick and choose what God's heart is. It's almost like we're at an all-you-can-eat buffet or it's an a la carte. We pick and choose what we decide is important. But God says that doing biblical justice is not an option. Because over the Bible, it's mentioned 2,500 times. Hear me. 2,500 times God talks about the least of these. He talks about the widow. He talks about the poor. He talks about the marginalized and the oppressed. If you want to know God's heart, just look through the Bible and you'll see that God's heart is for everyone, but especially he cares for the people that we in society forget about. And so I want us to understand, for us to do biblical justice, we first also have to take the other two things, which is to be kindness to people and to walk humbly. And here's what I mean by that. To have a sense of biblical justice, you have to be empathetic. You have to be empathetic. Empathy means that you're willing to understand the person that's speaking or you're interacting with. It's simply listening. And we're seeing a lot of people not listening. We're quick to talk, but not slow to listen and love. We see a part of empathy that's important too is creating space. We think we're creating space, but if someone's telling you what they think or what they believe, but you cut them off, that's not creating space. The best thing I like to say, when you create space, you create psychological safety, which means that you create an environment where people can take risks, they can be honest, they can be vulnerable without being tarnished, without being bullied or belittled. So if we want people to be honest about where they're at, if maybe it's the first time they're saying, I don't believe everything I'm seeing on TV, or I have questions. For us, especially 12 family, we're interacting with maybe family members, our parents, our grandparents, who maybe are just not seeing the things we're seeing. How are we supposed to live our lives to actually share with them? Maybe God is saying to you, you're going to be the one to share and impact their lives. But what we do is we close the door on them so quick. And so one of the things we do have to remember to be empathetic in this conversation is that we have to have emotional connections. Here's what I mean by emotional connections, is that we have to remind people that they're not alone. So what's so fascinating about the Christian life is that sometimes we forget that we were all falling short of the glory of God. And we look at people and we say, I can't believe you're doing that. But if we look at our own story, we were doing the exact same thing they were doing. And I want us to bring something to our attention that's so interesting. I laugh about this, but over the last 3 weeks, I've told my friends and many people, I found out I have the wokest friends in the world. Because before 3 weeks ago, most of my friends didn't speak up about the lives of black people. And this is nothing new, because this has been happening for over 250 years after the Emancipation Proclamation. And so I want us to be honest, because most of us didn't come out the womb woke. We didn't come out the womb speaking up about topics and issues that God called us to speak up about. But some of us are intentionally putting people down for not understanding what they understand. And so trust me when I say this. For us to do biblical justice, it means we're going to have to walk humbly, we're going to have to love people, and we're going to have to keep showing up. And that's hard to hear, especially when people belittle you, especially when people do not value you. But the same thing I'm telling you is the same thing that happened to Jesus Christ, that he showed up. When his disciples questioned him, he still showed up. When he went to the cross, he showed up. And one of the beautiful things about doing justice is you can't do it online. It's easy to tweet. It's easy to put on social media. It's easy to say a cute little video with a hashtag. But to do biblical justice, you have to be in proximity with people. You have to interact with people who look different than you. You have to have hard conversations with people who look the same as you. And here's why that's important. The reason why biblical justice is important is because it's required in all of us. For us to see and have a glimpse of what the kingdom of heaven is, that means that we have to live our lives allowing people to taste God's love for them, allowing people to remember that they're made in the imago Dei, which means made in the image of God. And that's hard to do, especially when we don't have grace on them. One of my favorite verses is in Ephesians chapter 2, verse 17. And what's fascinating about Ephesians is that it talks about this concept of race reconciliation, but how do you have reconciliation with people who are different than you? And what's interesting, they use a concept that stands out to me because I have to remind myself that when Jesus Christ came, he came for the oppressed and the oppressor. And this is what the scripture says. And when Jesus came, he preached peace to you who are near and to those who are far out. See, it's easy for me to say, okay, yes, Jesus has come for me because I understand his heart. But did Jesus Christ come for the person who believes black lives doesn't matter? Did Jesus Christ come to the person who believes that Jesus' life doesn't matter? That's what's tough, is that he did. And I'm saying that as a person who has to wrestle through that to know, how do I show biblical justice and love towards people who don't see the things I see or understand the things I see? And so, 12 family, I told you at the beginning, and I'm going to say it again. Our posture and where we go from here is critical. Our posture and where we go from here and how we interact and love people is critical. We cannot do biblical justice without loving people and walking humbly. Let us not forget that the grace that has been given to us, we're called to give that to other people. So my hope and my prayer is that we self-evaluate ourselves and we ask God, what are you doing in me so that I can love people better? What do you need to keep doing in me to allow myself to be more humble? Maybe I shouldn't have to keep talking. Maybe I'll just listen. Maybe I'll love someone by keep showing up. We need more people who are willing to do biblical justice and not just the justice of the world, so that our kingdom of heaven can look like what it says in Revelations, that all tribe, tongues, and nations will come together giving God praise. So we do all these things not for our own glory, but for the glory of God. Thanks, 12 family. That was it. I'm done. Yes.